Hello, and welcome to Understanding GMOs. I'm Allison Miner. I am a registered dietitian, educator, and a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I will be your host and moderator for this continuing professional education session presented by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. This presentation is part of the Feed Your Mind initiative, a consumer education program focused on agricultural biotechnology developed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. 4 experts will discuss genetically engineered foods, or as consumers often refer to them, GMOs. By the end of the presentation, you will have increased knowledge to apply to your practice and to share with your clients or patients as they seek answers to their questions about genetically engineered foods. Our presenters include Chris Wozniak, who recently retired after more than 20 years with the EPA, where he specialized in biotechnology. Chris will open the presentation with a GMOs 101, which will cover the basics like the definition and a brief history of genetically engineered foods, and what genetically engineered crops are grown and sold in the U.S. Next, Jason Dietz, Senior Policy Analyst and Biotechnology Coordinator with FDA's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, will share information regarding the health and safety of genetically engineered foods, 2 topics that are likely important to your clients and patients. This will include answers to questions raised about genetically engineered foods, such as whether there is a link between genetically engineered foods and allergies or cancer, and how the government regulates them. Tracy Powell, an agricultural research advisor for the U.S. Agency for International Development, is going to touch on some of the impacts genetically engineered crops have on our world outside the United States. This includes one particular genetically engineered crop that has had a major positive impact on farmers and communities in South Asia. Finally, Anna Waller from USDA will talk about a new federal law for labeling genetically engineered foods. So now, to begin our presentation, I'll turn it over to Chris Wozniak. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Allison. Hi, I'm Chris Wozniak. I recently retired from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, where I was the biotechnology special assistant. The EPA is responsible for protecting human health and the environment. This includes regulating the safety of the substances that protect genetically engineered plants and the pesticides that are used on all crops, both genetically engineered and not genetically engineered. Received my training in plant pathology and biochemistry at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and spent many years working in plant research and as a human health specialist before taking on my role in biotechnology at EPA, where I focused on issues of biotechnology policy and interagency coordination of biotech regulation. GMO has become the common term consumers and popular media use to describe foods that have been created through genetic engineering. While genetic engineering is the term often used by scientists, the term bioengineered is also used, particularly with regard to the foods we eat in the United States because of the new National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard. When we talk about GMOs today, we're referring to plants, animals, or microorganisms that have had their genetic material changed using genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is a breeding tool that generally involves the modification of DNA, including the transfer of specific DNA sequences from one organism to another. The process for making a genetically engineered plant involves identifying the genetic information or gene that gives a plant, animal, or microorganism a desired trait, copying that information from the organism that has the trait, inserting that information into the DNA of another organism, and then growing the modified organism to see if it has the desired trait. For thousands of years, humans have been using conventional modification methods, sometimes called traditional modification methods, to breed plants and animals with more desirable traits. Crossbreeding, selective breeding, and mutation breeding are all examples of conventional modification methods. Conventional methods often involve random combination of genes from two different sources. Conventional breeding methods have been used to create most of the plants and animals we eat today, including common crops like modern corn varieties and seedless watermelon. For example, early farmers developed crossbreeding methods to grow corn with a range of colors, sizes, and uses. Today, strawberries are a cross between a strawberry species native to North America and a strawberry species native to South America. Most of the foods we eat today were created through conventional breeding methods. However, newer methods of modification are now available. The reasons for genetic modification today are similar to what they were nearly 10,000 years ago when humans began to breed crops, such as higher crop yields, less crop loss to disease and pests, longer storage life, better appearance, improved nutrition, or some combination of these traits. Most of the genetically engineered crops grown today were developed to help farmers prevent crop loss. Some were developed to be resistant to insect damage, so farmers can apply fewer spray pesticides. Some are tolerant to herbicides, which helps farmers control weeds without damaging the crops. With herbicide-tolerant crops, farmers do not need to till the soil, which they normally do to get rid of weeds. This no-till planting helps to maintain soil health and lower fuel and labor use. Studies have shown that farming with genetically engineered crops can have positive economic and environmental impacts. Starting in the 1980s, scientists developed methods that could make more specific modifications to crops and make them faster. These methods are what we call genetic engineering. With genetic engineering, the number of genes introduced into any one crop is small, typically just one or two. That's out of thousands of genes naturally present in a plant. For example, scientists use genetic engineering to take just one beneficial gene, such as insect resistance, and transfer it into a plant. In this way, genes that are not useful to the new variety are left behind and not transferred to the new variety, saving years of crossbreeding needed to select the correct combination of traits by breeding out the genes that are not useful. Without genetic engineering, breeding is like mixing a salad bowl of ingredients and hoping your portion has lots of cherry tomatoes and no croutons. It could happen, but it's not likely when so many combinations are possible. Years after the development of genetic engineering, GMO foods became available to consumers. The first group of GMO crops introduced in the 1990s included summer squash, soybeans, cotton, corn, papayas, tomatoes, potatoes, and canola. Not all of them are still available for sale. However, some new crops and more varieties have entered the market over the years. Only a few types of genetically engineered crops are grown in the United States today, but some of these make up a large percentage of the crop grown. For example, GMO corn makes up 92% of all the corn grown in the U.S. Also, around 94% of soybeans grown in the U.S. are GMO. In the case of sugar beets, more than 95% of the U.S. crop is GMO. Among the GMO products currently available in the U.S. are certain varieties of alfalfa, apples, canola, corn, cotton, papaya, pineapple, potatoes, soybeans, summer squash, and sugar beets. A farm-raised Atlantic salmon and pork from a type of pig have been approved for food use, but you may not see them in the market because they are not widely available yet. Most genetically engineered crops are used in food for animals like cows, chickens, and fish. They're also used to make ingredients that are used in food products like cereal, snack chips, and vegetable oils. Even though you won't find many genetically engineered fruits or vegetables in the produce section of your grocery store, ingredients from genetically engineered crops are a common part of today's food supply. Allison, back to you.
Thank you very much for that primer, Chris. Now I'll turn it over to Jason Dietz, who will talk about the health and safety of genetically engineered foods.
Thank you, Allison. I'm Jason Dietz. and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst and the Biotechnology Coordinator with FDA's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. Some of my academic training is in human nutrition, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I also have a master's degree in food science and have worked in FDA's plant biotechnology program for 20 years. Being familiar with the conversation around biotechnology in the public sphere, I can imagine that your patients or clients might ask you if GMOs are safe to eat. There are certainly a lot of views about them expressed in both print and on the internet. Our goal here is to give you information that will help you answer questions. So, are GMO foods safe to eat? Yes. I think it's important to understand that these foods are carefully studied before they are sold to the public to ensure they are as safe as the non-GMO foods we eat. In fact, as part of the safety assessment, developers compare safety characteristics of the GMO variety with non-GMO varieties that we have historically safely consumed. These studies show that GMOs are as safe and nutritious as their non-GMO counterparts, and that they do not affect our health any differently than non-GMOs. In most cases, the foods from genetically engineered crops aren't different in the way they are used or prepared, or in their nutritional content from their non-genetically engineered counterparts. In fact, some genetically engineered plants have actually been modified to improve their nutritional value. An example is genetically engineered soybeans with healthier oils, such as high oleic acid, that can be used to replace oils that contain trans fats and are used for frying. Multiple federal agencies within the U.S. government work together to regulate GMOs. FDA works closely with EPA and USDA to ensure that GMOs are safe for people and for the environment. These agencies monitor the impact of GMOs on the environment. Collaboration and coordination among these agencies helps make sure food developers understand the rules they need to follow when creating new plants through genetic engineering. FDA makes sure that foods from GMOs meet the same safety standards as non-GMO foods. EPA is responsible for protecting human health and the environment. Part of this is regulating pesticides, including the substances that protect genetically engineered plants to make them more resistant to insects and disease. An example would be the proteins, often referred to as Bt proteins, in some genetically engineered crops, including corn and cotton, that specifically target certain insect pests. EPA also oversees the safety of all other types of pesticides, including those used on crops and those you might use on plants in your garden or lawn to protect them from insects or weeds. USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, protects agriculture in the United States from plant pests and plant diseases. Before going to market, most genetically engineered crops are tested for several years in field trials, regulated by APHIS for plant pests and EPA for pesticides. Case in point, when tested in field trials, the genetically engineered late blight resistant potato was found to be highly resistant to attack by late blight. That's the disease that caused the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. This is an example of a genetically engineered crop that reduces plant pest risk and also reduces the need for fungicide applications. One question I often hear is whether GMOs cause food allergies or allergic reactions. Research shows that GMO foods currently on the market are no more likely to cause allergic reactions than non-GMO foods. Most food allergies are caused by allergens found in just 9 foods: peanuts, milk, wheat, sesame, fish, tree nuts, eggs, soy, and shellfish. The way GMOs are created allows scientists to know precisely which new proteins are introduced into a plant. The federal agencies monitor developments carefully so that consumers have the information they need about GMOs and allergies. Allergenicity testing is routinely part of the process for developing GMOs. As part of this testing, developers consider whether any new proteins in the food have characteristics of allergens, such as whether they come from an allergenic source, or whether the proteins are similar to known allergens. Here's an example. In the 1990s, a company developing a new soybean for improved protein content transferred a protein from a Brazil nut into a soybean during product development. Some people are allergic to Brazil nuts. So, as part of safety testing, the company tested to see whether they had transferred the Brazil nut allergen to the new soy variety. The testing showed that in fact, they had transferred the Brazil nut allergen to soy, and the company discontinued development of the product, recognizing that the soybeans would be unsafe for those allergic to Brazil nuts. That GMO soy never made it to market. I sometimes see articles about gluten-free or reduced gluten diets in the media. Some people might wonder if the cases of celiac disease are rising because of GMOs. As you all know, celiac disease is a serious condition that affects the digestive system. It is caused by an abnormal immune response to gluten, a protein found in wheat, rye, and barley. There is no genetically engineered wheat, rye, or barley available for sale to consumers in the United States today. If wheat, rye, or barley were ever to be used as a source of protein in a GMO food, we would very carefully consider whether that protein was one that would cause a reaction in people with celiac disease. Another question I've heard is whether there is a link between GMOs and cancer. Genetically engineered crops are not changed in ways that would increase the risk of cancer. GMOs are typically modified in ways that simply produce new proteins, carbohydrates, or fats, nutrients that we have safely consumed for generations. For example, any newly expressed proteins in GMOs are well studied and are typically similar to other proteins we've safely consumed in other foods. The safety of these proteins is studied before marketing to make sure they are not harmful. These proteins, when consumed, would be expected to be digested like any other proteins in the diet. So, GMOs are not changed in ways that would produce a new or unusual substance that would lead scientists to expect that these foods would increase the risk of cancer. In addition to those considerations, an analysis of data by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in a comprehensive study in 2017 found that patterns of change in cancer rates in the United States, where people commonly eat GMOs, are similar to Europe and the United Kingdom, where people eat less GMO foods. So, cancer rates are not connected with eating GMOs. I would add that the finding of safety of these products isn't limited just to FDA and the National Academies of Sciences. Other countries around the world, such as Canada, Australia, Japan, and even European countries, have reached similar conclusions of safety. In fact, there is an internationally agreed upon approach to assess the food safety of GMOs that was developed by the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The approach to safety assessment used by FDA is consistent with the WHO-FAO approach. When I go to international meetings with safety assessors from around the world, we generally agree about the characteristics of these foods that are important to safety assessment, such as the safety of any added substances and whether the composition of the food has been changed in a way that would be important to nutrition. And there is agreement that the products currently on the market are safe. So, you can feel confident that the products on the market are carefully assessed for safety and are as safe as other similar foods.
Jason, good insights. Thanks for sharing that information about the health and safety of GMOs. Next, we have Tracy Powell from USAID, who's going to talk about GMOs from a global perspective. And more specifically, she'll give you a closer look at one genetically engineered crop that is making an impact both economically and on the ability to feed populations.
Well, thank you for the introduction. For those who don't know the acronym, I work at the United States Agency for International Development. USAID is the agency that leads U.S. humanitarian assistance and international development programming, and that includes leading Feed the Future, which is the U.S. government's signature initiative to reduce global hunger, poverty, and malnutrition. So within that very ambitious initiative, my specific role is to manage international agricultural research grants focused on developing countries. And for the last few years, I've led USAID's research programs on agricultural biotechnology, which is why I'm here with you today. Now, so far, I think the other presenters have given a great introduction to how genetic engineering works. They've described the regulatory systems, both here in the US and around the world, that evaluate any potential risks of GMOs before they're released. And they've highlighted the outstanding track record of safety that genetically engineered crops have worldwide. But at this point in today's presentations, I think one key question that we haven't really addressed is why bother with GMOs in the first place? What is so important about agricultural biotechnology and genetically engineered crops that we go to all this trouble? So some of the other presenters have already talked about the economic and environmental impacts of genetically engineered crops in the US and in other developed countries. But from my perspective, working in international development, the answer is particularly clear. And that's that alongside other plant breeding methods, genetic engineering provides flexible, powerful tools that plant breeders can use to improve crops. Now, that doesn't mean genetic engineering is the only tool that we use, or that it's always the first tool that we should reach for. But in some cases, genetic engineering has the potential to address farming challenges more effectively, more quickly, or in ways that other approaches simply can't. So here you can see some examples of how USAID's research programs are applying genetic engineering. Our program's focus is on staple and locally preferred crop varieties that are important to small-scale farmers in developing countries. And in partnership with local scientists, we aim to enhance crop traits that are relevant in low-input smallholder farming systems. So some examples of that include developing genetically modified cassava, banana, potato varieties that can resist viral and bacterial diseases that routinely wipe out entire harvests. Developing locally preferred climate-resilient corn varieties that resist devastating insect pests like the fall armyworm or African stem borer. Other examples include local West African rice varieties that perform better under drought and low nitrogen soil conditions, or cereal and vegetable crops that are biofortified with vitamin A, iron, or zinc. So clearly, USAID's partners are working on a wide range of efforts to apply genetic engineering to address local agricultural challenges. But to really unpack some of the impacts of GMOs in a global context, today I'd like to take a deeper dive into one specific example of how a genetically engineered crop can drive food security impacts, and that's insect-resistant BT eggplant in Bangladesh. So here's a short video to set the stage.
Brinjal, also known as eggplant, is one of the most important crops in Bangladesh. As farmer Muhammad Shah Jahan says, if the crop survives, it makes good profit. But the key is getting the crop to survive.
বেগুন করতে গেলে সমস্যা আপনার যে গাছটা যে ফুলে যায় গাছটার মধ্যে পোকা আসে অনেক পোকা আসে সিট পোকাগুলো আছে না এরকম পোকা এসে যে ডোকাগুলো খেয়ে যায় ডোকা খেলে তো মনে করেন যে ওই গাছটাই ডোকাটাই বাতিল হয়ে যায়
Brinjal is a very popular vegetables in Bangladesh, but the main obstacle or main drawbacks of this crop cultivation is insect attack. It is fruit and shoot borer. To control that fruit and shoot borer, farmers indiscriminately use insecticide. If they spray in the morning, in the evening they are harvesting their brinjal and going to the market. So it is very dangerous for the not only environment but also it affect our health.
বেগুন গাছটা রোয়ার পরে আপনার যদি বীজটা যদি না দেই তাহলে গাছটা মারা যাবে মনে করেন বিষ দিলে একটু শরীরের ক্ষতি হয়, শরীরটা একটু দুর্বল থাকে। আপনার যে ওই আমার শরীরে বিষ পড়লে কিন্তু আমি শরীরটা ঝুলে যায়, আমি কিন্তু এখানে কামলা দিয়ে খালি বিষ দিই।
Now, as you can see here, the eggplant fruit and shoot borer can decimate a smallholder farmer's harvest. And to protect their livelihoods, the farmers being interviewed here say they typically spray their eggplant crop around 40 times per season. But that's actually on the low side. Based on farmer surveys, we know that some farmers spray more than 140 times per season. Now, that's almost daily with quite toxic pesticides. This is much more frequently than would typically be allowed in the US, and often without the level of regulatory protection or training that we would expect to ensure that farmers have access to protective gear or sufficient awareness of the potential negative impacts of pesticide overuse. Now, although the eggplant fruit and shoot borer is certainly not the only problem facing Bangladeshi eggplant farmers, it is a significant problem. And moreover, this is a problem for which a powerful solution has existed for decades in the form of insect-resistant Bt crops. Bt stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a kind of friendly bacterium that organic farmers around the world spray onto crops as a biocontrol agent to protect against certain types of insect pests. And for the past 30 years, scientists have used genetic engineering to take specific Bt genes that make these bacteria effective tools for fending off insects and inserted those genes directly into crops like corn or cotton. Now, this makes the plants themselves resistant to these insects. And I think you heard Jason describe some of these crops in his presentation earlier. But Bt technology has historically been used in major crops like corn in the United States and other developed countries. So the benefits of this powerful insect resistance has not yet been extended to the types of crops and locally preferred varieties that matter most to developing country farmers. So to make the benefits of Bt technology more broadly accessible, USAID supports a partnership between the Bangladesh Agricultural Research Institute, or BARI, Cornell University here in the US, and an Indian seed company named Mahika. Now, this partnership has helped Bangladeshi scientists develop locally adapted varieties of Bt eggplant that are highly resistant to the eggplant fruit and shoot borer. After a number of years developing and testing the locally adapted varieties, in 2014, Bangladeshi regulators approved the release of the first 4 Bt eggplant varieties in Bangladesh. So fast forward 6 years, and by 2020, these varieties were being grown by an estimated 27,000 Bangladeshi farmers on nearly 5,000 hectares of land, which is more than 12,000 acres. So this is one of the first cases of a genetically engineered crop being released and widely grown in USAID's partner countries. So that's great because it's allowed us to collect robust farm-level data to check on how Bt eggplant is actually impacting agricultural production, the environment, and smallholder farmers who grow these genetically engineered varieties. Now, several studies have been done that show similar trends, but the biggest and the most rigorous was a 2018 randomized control trial conducted by the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI, which I'll focus on today. IFPRI surveyed 1,200 farmers across 200 Bangladeshi villages. Half of the farmers were randomly selected to grow one of the 4 Bt eggplant varieties, and the other half received the identical but non-Bt conventional eggplant variety. The study found that the Bt trait worked exactly as expected. In farmers' fields, it provided 95% near total protection against the eggplant fruit and shoot borer, and Bt eggplant led to a 42% increase in yields compared with the non-GMO eggplant varieties. Here you can see the protective effect of Bt eggplant on the right compared to the non-GMO variety on the left. Farmers who grew Bt eggplant earned around $400 more in profits per hectare. That's 14% higher than the non-Bt farmers. Now, most of that increase was because once the Bt trait was protecting their crop from the fruit and shoot borer, farmers didn't have to spend as much money on pesticides. And this brings me to a really crucial point from a food safety and environmental health perspective. Now, thanks to the added protection of the Bt trait, Bt eggplant farmers sprayed their crop half as many times as non-Bt farmers and sprayed 39% less total pesticides. So although Bt eggplant farmers did still apply some pesticides in order to control other types of pests and diseases, the mix of pesticides that they did apply was about half as toxic as the pesticides applied by farmers who grew the non-GMO variety. So not only are BT eggplant farmers in Bangladesh applying smaller amounts of pesticides less frequently, the pesticides they do apply are significantly less toxic to humans and to the environment. Furthermore, after only a single season of cultivating BT eggplant, farmers reported on average 10% fewer symptoms of pesticide exposure than non-BT farmers. And they also report being about 6.5% less likely to need to seek medical care for these symptoms. So cumulatively, I hope that this emerging story of BT eggplant in Bangladesh helps to show the potential value of GMOs and their ability to drive productivity, profitability, environmental sustainability, food safety, and human health gains for smallholder farmers in developing countries. And although this specific case study of eggplant in Bangladesh is only one small niche within global agriculture, I think the range of potential benefits of insect-resistant BT crops in particular, and diverse types of genetically engineered crops more broadly, shows why the tools and products of genetic engineering can be so important.
Anna Waller from USDA is now going to join us to touch on the latest federal labeling requirements for genetically engineered foods.
Hi, my name is Anna Waller, and I'm an agricultural marketing specialist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the Agricultural Marketing Service. I received my PhD in food science and human nutrition at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Certain types of genetically engineered foods have a disclosure that lets you know if the food is bioengineered. Bioengineered food is the term that Congress used to describe certain types of genetically engineered foods when they passed the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard. The standard establishes requirements for labeling foods that humans eat that are or may be bioengineered, and defines bioengineered foods as those that contain detectable modified genetic material and cannot be created through conventional breeding or found in nature. The regulations implementing the standard require that food manufacturers, importers, and certain retailers label foods that are bioengineered or have bioengineered ingredients. Foods sold in the United States that meet the definition of bioengineered food must have information on their packaging using one of the approved methods, including text on the package that says bioengineered food or contains a bioengineered food ingredient, the bioengineered food symbol, or directions for using your phone or other device to find the disclosure through a QR code or another electronic link, or via text message.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you to our other presenters, Chris, Jason, and Tracy. We appreciate you all sharing your expertise and knowledge about GMOs and the topics related to genetic engineering and agricultural biotechnology. And for those of you who joined us today, we hope you found it informative and helpful for you in your practices. Perhaps we've answered some of the questions your clients and patients might have about GMOs and how they relate to health and nutrition. For more information about what's been discussed today, I encourage you to download the accompanying material at fda.gov/feedyourmind. Of course, they're for you to read and refer to, but just as important, this is information you can share with your clients and patients. Thank you again for taking part in today's continuing education presentation, Understanding GMOs.